Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about this scar some more while I go back and revisit some of the thoughts that were going through my head when I first became aware. And in particular, we're going to ask, can this be caused by a solar flare? Because that was one of the thoughts I had. And at the time when I first became aware, it was July of 2018, one of the guys I was following for my information was this guy on this channel right here, and he was talking about the sun primarily was his focus of concern on a regular basis, is why I was just listening, because I would pick up information from him. While I was learning from him, I was also going back and trying to learn what I could from the Thunderbolts Project people. And around this time, this guy seemed to dip really hard on his theory about micronovas. I don't know if anybody saw his work. I mean, he's pretty well followed, pretty well known. But looking at the scale of a solar flare, this is the size of our Earth. I'll make this one a little bit bigger. The Earth is just a speck, and the solar flare is huge. So when you go to this, yeah, in that perspective, it seems like this is something that might be worth considering, whether or not this could be actually created by a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection of some sort. I'm going to make more videos why I don't think this was created by anything like this. I don't think this can do that, although I'm not going to lie, this was one of the reasons why I stopped looking at the map, was just going back and even thinking there's a possibility that this might happen again on this scale. So while I'm going back to revisit some of my thoughts, I'll let you guys process that to think for yourselves whether or not this could be caused by a solar flare, because for me that actually led to a few other ideas that I found rather fascinating, and ultimately my conclusion. But here, if you could imagine one side of this planet getting struck by something like this, causing all kinds of chaos, and I don't know, because I didn't understand the physics behind the electromagnetic force at that time, to where I was still questioning this in my mind, but I was more focused on first finding another person who was actually aware of these scars on this scale, because to me it did not seem like this guy understood that this was even on our planet. I know he knows Billy Yelverton and his work, so he's obviously, I knew he was aware of the electric universe concepts. He's made references to Velikovsky, all that. So he seemed really focused on a solar flare, which to me, that's more scary, because it's something that could happen again. But we actually have been struck by solar flares, and they don't really do much to this planet, and I didn't understand why until I learned more about physics. Now, Ben started to promote his theory about micronovas, was his big thing. At around this time, he started going really hard on his micronova theory, and he started promoting the work of another guy, this guy, which I was really skeptical when he started promoting this dude, because everything about this, he's talking about alternate realities. I'm trying to learn about science, and then I'm just going to get rid of him right now. I'll come back to this guy later, but so this, around the same time, is when I was also becoming aware of, like, see, here you go. This is his channel. The Next End of the World, CIA Classified. Now, when I hear this, see, you know, whatever, that agency, I immediately think misinformation just because of the history. And, like, these are the people who pretty much brainwashed the entire world to not believe there's an electromagnetic force, in my opinion. This goes back to Nazi Germany carrying on those experiments, bringing Operation Paperclip, bringing those people into our country, and next thing you know, everyone in the world like doesn't even believe the electromagnetic force exists. So this is like really weird stuff in my opinion. But going back to this book, Adam and Eve, I think. Now the credentials of the guy, it was accredited to Thomas Chan, I think is the name of this like CIA classified book, but sometimes they would classify something just to unclassify it later, and that is their misinformation. They act like they're hiding it from you, so everybody thinks that it's big when it's unclassified, but really, so looking at this, the credentials of the person that they were writing about, I couldn't find anything about the writer, but I started to look at some of the credentials, and this guy kind of popped out. He's an American scientist, but this is when I started to become aware of the primary concepts about catastrophism and the differences between uniformitarian mentality and catastrophists. And I mean, I was already aware of the creationist perspective where they say all of this was created in 7 days and whatever. Like that didn't make sense, and I don't see everything just coming about all at once. But then you have a completely opposite extreme, like in direct conflict with what these people are saying. But I think people misinterpret the stories as literal. They take them too literally is the problem with that. And when you have somebody who doesn't believe and they're trying to base the literal interpretation off, they misinterpret what other people believe when you say the word creationist. So on the other extreme, you have the uniformitarian mentality who they automatically assume hundreds of millions of years. But the problem with that, they call it science, but it's very unscientific because nobody can observe those hundreds of millions of years. You have to wait hundreds of millions of years to see if that theory checks out. You understand? But in the meantime, they take that and they force that mentality on the young and impressionable mind to where these kids are learning this from a young age. So that was not what I wanted to talk about this video, but we'll get into more of that later. So whether or not this can be created by a solar flare was the primary question running through my mind. And the scars maybe, but it really doesn't explain like the redistribution of landmass like that. So there's still, like, I don't think this could have caused the force. There's like an actual physical force on top of the electrical force and even the magnetic force. Like you see all three components of the electromagnetic force in this equation. And that is where I'm going to have to get you guys caught up on how I learned about specifically the physics behind the electromagnetic force while I was processing this, because there was a lot of concepts that suddenly jumped out at me while I was processing other stuff along the way. And a lot of it started to make sense once I applied the physics properly, like everything. So sorry if this is going slow in the beginning. We're going to kind of speed it up once we get caught up, but I have to go back and retake all the steps, because when I thought about whether this could be created by a solar flare, we'll talk more about Frank Press later. We'll talk more about this later. We'll talk more about these things later. But now, when I was going back to consider whether or not this could happen in a relatively short period of time, the scars that I'm seeing remind me of this, in a way, from what we started with. So I don't know if a solar flare can actually cause this redistribution of landmass. It might help shape if we got struck by this while this is already in these general positions and this comes into a more cohesive shape. That might be possible. But by then, these land masses would have already had to be redistributed fairly to where they were, in my opinion, if we're going to take one of these and we expect our Earth to look like this when we wanted it to start from this. So I don't think a solar flare could do that, because solar flares that we have in our time, they don't do much. And this was where it's really just a matter of going through and trying to eliminate what else might have caused this while we look for other potential causes, other potential root causes as to what may have caused this scar in very, very particular. Like, that's just all I wanted to know at that point in time. All right. Good luck, everyone. I'll see you more. I'll do more today. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.